BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an gestural implant, 68 milligrams radiopaque. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Brew Strong is brought to you by Blickman Engineering, home of the Riptide. Visit them online at blickmanengineering.com.
Brewers, it's time for the beer radio you've been looking for. This is the show that dispels myths, tackles the toughest topics, and makes no apologies for geeking out on beer. Hosted by two guys that drink before they think, Jamil Zainasheff and John Palmer. This is Brew Strong.
Hey, howdy, hey, I'm Jamil Zainasheff.
This is Huggy Bear.
This is TC. You're listening to Brew Strong. And today we have a show on yeast counting with special guests of a great friend of ours, John Hughes. John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, John Hughes here. I was an employee of Jamil's a while ago at Heretic, was his quality assurance manager. I helped set up his lab when I was still in grad school at UC Davis. Got my PhD there in microbiology. Then later on went to direct the Master Brewers Certificate program at UC Davis for several years. And right now I'm doing some writing, doing some consulting, and spending some time with my 1-year-old.
So John, when you got out of college and Jamil hired you full time, did you get a raise, or did he keep you, putting you down there, just keeping you on the cheap?
I think I actually got a pay cut.
Yeah, that's about right. That's about right.
I mean, minimum wage.
Which it means the minimum he could pay you, not necessarily the minimum by law, but the minimum he could pay you.
Yes.
Well, it's great to have you here on the show today, and this is our first quality lab show, as we're going to call it, on yeast counting. And we started off with this as a larger topic, but we're finding there's a lot to talk about, and we are going to geek out pretty good on this, and hopefully give you enough details to feel confident to bring your yeast counting game either up a level or into play. But who doesn't have any yeast counting equipment yet? Maybe we have to talk them into developing a line of lab type equipment, Jamil.
Blickman Engineering, our good friends. They should come up with a inexpensive way to automate your cell counts. That'd be awesome.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They could have their main Blickman line. They could have their Anvil line. Eventually, they could even develop their Pro line. I bet they'd do well with it. We have to talk to Drew about that. I'm assuming he listens to these shows eventually. Drew, I think this would be a great idea for you guys to offer some of the things that we're going to talk about today. But what they do offer, and we always mention the beer gun, and I start to wonder, does anyone not have a beer gun? And I bet there are people out there that don't have a beer gun, and it is the easiest, greatest way I know of to fill a bottle for competition or for drinking later or whatever you have it. But that's like entry level. They almost should give those away just so you start getting hooked on the Blickman line, because they have fermenters from 5 gallons to custom mega barrel things you'd put in a pro brewery. I know we have the brewing equipment, the kettles for the homebrew. Do they have professional kettle systems also, like professional brew houses, Jamil?
Oh, sure. Last I heard, up to 10 barrels, but they may actually have larger ones available now.
Yeah, I know they do custom on the fermenters that go much larger than that, but a 10-barrel brew house, we should take a poll someday to find out the largest brew house at a home brewer's house.
I bet you it's pretty big. I've run across home brewers that would have a lot of them have like 1 barrel, but I I swear somebody had a 3 barrel. I can't remember who it is. And Blickman makes some nice compact 3 barrel systems that'll roll through a doorway. So
That's really interesting.
I'm sure there's homebrewers that are knocking off 3 barrels at a time.
Why not? I mean,
Surprise.
because you can.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm a fan of the Anvil line myself. I use the Anvil Foundry to make all my beer these days. I downsized from 10 gallons to 5 gallons, thinking I would drink less beer. That part didn't happen. But I've been using the Anvil Foundry for a couple of years now.
It's brewed twice as much.
Yeah, maybe. We're not talking about that. But it's got a lot of bells and whistles for the quote unquote less flashy line of Blickman. I set my mash pre-temp up. Oh, night before when I wake up in the morning, it's 152 degrees. I add my grains, drop it down to 148, and do my mash. Don't have to wait for it to warm up in the morning. It's waiting for me, and I that's just made such a nice feature for me, and actually to have that temperature control. I don't think I could go back to propane. That's just me.
And you only drop 4 degrees when you mash in?
Yeah. So typically,
Wow, that's pretty good.
Also, I've got 90-degree grain here in Houston.
Oh, that's true. It's preheated.
I open it up and it's sweating.
With
looking at me like
the
I'm in it.
humidity you have there, you'd think it'd all be pre-mashed.
Yeah. I could leave the top off. It'd probably work out pretty well.
Yeah.
No, I milled a night or two before, and it's always upper 80s. It seems, it'll when I brew this weekend, it'll be upper 80s. And actually, Beersmith, I always drop about 2.5 degrees below Beersmith because I learned, and you can put your temperature into Beersmith, but Beersmith's trying to calculate the thermal mass of everything you're brewing with as well, and that's relying on you to put that information into Beersmith. So we know Beersmith's the thing that does it right. Unless as homebrewers, we're the ones that are screwing up, putting the wrong information into Beersmith. But that's an easy adaptation. Beersmith says 154.5, I go 152. So
All
it's
right.
anywhere around
How
there.
about yeast counting?
About yeast count, we need a definition on that. John, can you give us a definition? Look, can you bring it down to a level I can understand?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main part is, you're starting with a yeast slurry, and then you want to count how many yeast cells you have per milliliter of that, so that then when you calculate out how many yeast cells you need in your wort, then you can pitch the appropriate amount of slurry.
It's about like what it sounds like. You're actually counting the cells on the yeast of the
Exactly.
yeast. Yeah, multiplying it up. It's good stuff. All right, so let's take a short break and we can talk about the equipment used for counting yeast. And we're back and we are talking counting yeast with our special guest, John Hughes. Quick definition. I don't know why I do a recap, because if you're catching this part, you had to catch the part before. So we're getting into the equipment part of it. So what's the main things you need? I mean, you can't count this stuff with the naked eye. So what are we doing here?
Yeah, I mean the simplest equipment that you can use to count yeast is a specialized microscope slide called a hemocytometer. It's an extra thick glass slide with a grid etched into it, and then it's got a special cover slip, and that cover slip is perfectly weighted so that as it sets on top of the counting chamber, it creates a space that is of a uniform volume, and that volume is 10 to the minus 4 milliliters. And so then when you count the yeast that are inside that counting chamber, then you multiply by 10 to the 4 to get the number of cells per milliliter. But before you do that, if you just put a blob of slurry on there, you would be way too many yeast cells to count. So you got to do some dilution before you actually are able to count them.
Well, in dilution, isn't that and serial dilution, where you dilute it more than once? Isn't that like the most critical thing to getting a precise count of the cells? I mean, if you mess up by a milliliter here or there in your cereal dilution, it really, you're multiplying that mistake more and more, especially if you do multiple dilutions. So you gotta kind of be careful. That's probably one of the first things.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the right equipment comes in with pipettes. A lot of people they want to buy these the plastic bulb pipettes, and those are great if you just wanted to move around a few drops here and there, but to be able to actually measure it, you can do that with low volume glass pipettes. But once you start getting into the really small volumes, talking, less than a tenth of a milliliter, then you're going to want to use the kind of micro pipettes that you find in laboratories. Those are the ones with like the ejectable tips.
And those are
It's very
still
interesting.
fairly inexpensive, right?
Yeah, I think you can get them for maybe $30, $40, especially used. Although you want to make sure you get them calibrated because they can get out of calibration if used improperly.
Yeah. eBay has tons of them. And there are, lower priced glass ones that are, fine, fairly fine that you can use for a lot of the measurements that you need to do. And again, you can find them essentially new on Amazon, or you can find them also new or used on eBay. That's pretty much where I got
So
every
something
piece of lab equipment for Heretic was
nice.
that, or John found something in his wanderings.
So, something that jumped out at me on that. Are you precisely measuring the drop you put on your slide?
No, that's actually not as important because the way you load a hemocytometer, you put the cover slip on first. So most of the time with like a regular wet mount microscope slide, you put the drop on, then you cover it with a cover slip. But with a
Hmm.
hemocytometer, you put the cover slip on first, and you got to make sure it's on there properly, which means basically you can take that hemocytometer and turn it sideways, and that cover slip will stick on there. It takes a couple of tries. I always found you kind of blow on the cover slip with like hot breath, kind of like we were cleaning your glasses, and you kind of fog it up. And then once you stick that down, it'll kind of suction onto it. Um, and then there's two little kind of channel ports. So there's two counting chambers on the hemocytometer. And so for each one, there's this little channel groove. And so what you do is you just kind of get a little droplet of your dilution and just touch that groove with the drop, and capillary action will actually carry the fluid
Oh,
in.
oh wow.
And you actually want to make sure that you are not actually pipetting, like you're not pushing out with a pipette, because if you drive fluid in there too hard, then you can kind of disrupt that interaction with the cover slip and have it slide off, and then you don't have that proper volume.
Interesting.
So
So yeah, and it
same
only
thing
pull in
on.
exactly how much it needs, right?
Yes, yeah, and I mean, the full area underneath there is much, much larger than the actual counting chamber, and so that helps to kind of keep things homogeneous in there.
So the hemocytometer and the cover slips and all that. Again, you can get them off Amazon. You get them off of eBay. Um, Hemocytometers, they used to run 50 to $100 for a decent one. But then they came down. I think I bought some as low as like $30 or $35.
Now,
A lot of
are
times
are
they'll
you
come with a couple of cover slips
Yeah. Yeah, and
that
you
are
can find some, you can definitely find, yeah, some on the cheaper side, but there's a lot of garbage out there. So, make
Mhm.
sure you read the reviews and things like that.
Yeah.
are you likely to damage this? You need to have two or three of them on hand.
It's
No, not unless you drop them.
Okay.
I'd say dropping is the most common way to damage it, and then it just breaks in half. Um,
Are you breaking the cover slip or are you breaking the slide or both?
I mean, the cover slip is probably more likely to break because it'll, smaller, harder to keep track of. Usually they
Mm-hmm.
ship with two cover slips, so one as a backup. Um, The other thing is it's possible to scratch the etched surface. And like if you got a small scratch or two on there, it's not going to be a big deal, but sometimes you can actually make the lines more difficult to see. So,
Okay.
They are pretty heavy pieces of glass, the hemocytometers. They're not like really thin and fine. They're a little chunky.
But it's glass, so don't drop it, right?
Yeah.
yeah.
So the thing that hit me, and the reason I asked you about that measurement is we're getting real fine with the dilution. If I don't have the very nicest, fanciest pipe that you just mentioned, can I dilute a larger quantity and just use a
Oh,
smaller amount of that?
absolutely. And usually what you see is Jamil talked about serial dilution. So that means
Hmm.
you do one tenfold dilution, you mix that well, and then you do a tenfold dilution of that one. So then you end up with a 100-fold dilution or 10 to the second. And so what I often see is you put 9 milliliters of your dilution fluid into a test tube, and then you put 1 milliliter of your sample into that. And so it's pretty easy to get pipettes that will accurately measure, 1 milliliter at a time. One of the big ways you can get inconsistency and inaccuracy on this, though, is when you're starting with your yeast slurry, because it is so thick. Um, it's what I always recommended was we had these 50 milliliter conical plastic tubes, and so I would fill those with 46%, 45 milliliters of dilution fluid, and then put in 5 milliliters of my um, yeast slurry. And so you're just dealing with a larger volume. It's a little easier to handle. Then the last thing with that is that your yeast was going to stick to the inside of your pipette. So it's always important once you pipette out, once you dispense that, then you draw some fluid up and you go up and down until you've rinsed out the inside of that pipette. That way you're sure to get that full volume there.
And you probably want to shake all these dilutions, right, really well so everything is homogeneously mixed.
Exactly, yeah. And if, there you get these in labs, you get these what are called vortex shakers, where you just stick the tube into it and it spins around pretty quickly. That works pretty well. You can also hold the top of the tube pretty firmly with your fingers and thump it with the two fingers on your other hand, and that gets a little bit of some nice mixture in there. Pipetting up and down is also good for mixing. So lots of options there.
Depends on the strain of yeast too. Some yeasts will be really, really flocculent and will just stick together like there's no tomorrow. But most of them will break back apart. But you need them to break apart so you can count individual cells versus seeing a lump of yeast under the scope. But there's ways to do it to make the yeast release from each other.
Paint shaker?
And I guess you need to consider, of course, the condition of the yeast you're pulling from to start with. I mean, like, yeah, I collect my yeast, I put it into a sterilized container, it starts to separate out. If I shake it right then, well, I better not lose any of that because that shaken volume is the volume I'm working on. I'm determining the volume, the counts of yeast per ml of that volume. So if I shake it, it settles, I pour some off, I just screwed myself up.
Well,
Yeah.
your count has changed.
Yes.
Your per mill
If I shake it and I pull some off and somehow it settles and I dump, I did something stupid. So shake it, pull some off, don't dump off. That's what you're working with. You're proving the concentration of what you shook up right there.
Yeah.
So you said microscope.
Yeah,
Uh,
so microscopes for counting yeast, all you need is a basic bright field light microscope. You don't need to go fancy, you don't need phase contrast. And these things, I mean, you can find them online for $20, $30. The big factor here when looking at microscope quality is the objective lenses. So those are the ones that are on the revolving nose piece that you can cycle through between 4x, 10x, 40x. And usually, if you have a light microscope, it'll go up to a 100x objective, which is actually a 1000x magnification because your ocular is 10x. But that 100x objective is the generally the kind of the bottleneck for pricing on microscopes. And so low priced microscopes will have pretty low quality 100x objectives. The 40x is still it's generally relatively good, and especially you're just counting yeast cells. You're not really looking into kind of getting into the physiology too much. Then you should be good.
Yeah,
So
you
40x.
need what 400x total magnification.
That's correct. Yeah, the 40x objective is 400x mag.
A
And
40
that's
and a
our
40 and a 10.
Yeah.
and that's our prime for counting yeast.
Yeah, because yeast cells are pretty big. They're 3 to 5 micrometers or microns across, and so you can see them just fine at the
John, have you ever
magnification.
tried those digital camera ones?
I've looked at them. I've never gotten to kind of really play with them too much. The one I've got looked at the most is Oculize. They always have a demonstration at CBC, at the Craft Brewers Conference. Yeah, a lot of these now you're seeing where there's no body to the microscope. There's no ocular. You can't look through it at all. It's just the magnification. You set the slide on top of it, and then it sometimes it's got software that will actually count the yeast for you. Um, I think they're pretty accurate. The problem with a lot of those is that they use proprietary slides, so they don't use the standard hemocytometer, and they're single use. So that's kind of they I think they probably sell the equipment at a loss, and then they get you buying their proprietary slides, and they probably also have some kind of a subscription
Annual fee
fee
or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
That does not sound fun for the home brewer.
No.
Well, and counting yeast is actually fairly easy. I mean, it's not rocket science. It's being able to count. It's being able to. I know some of us have problems with that, but if you can measure things correctly, get your dilutions correct, keep track of it, and then preparing the slide is actually fairly easy, and then counting. So one of the things though that those little hand clickers. You push the button, it advances one. Those are great for counting yeast because if you're doing 1, 2, 3, 4, you just hit the button as you're doing it. And somebody counting yeast that's got experience with these things goes really fast. And you can even have two. They're not very expensive. Get them again off Amazon or eBay, and use one to count all the cells, and then one to count if you're doing viability at the same time. You can do one to count the non-viable cells, and then you can do some basic math, and you can do it all in one.
I bet there's an app for that you just like sit there and tap your phone and it counts.
There probably is.
Yeah.
Right,
And then
that
you
was
get a phone
phone,
call
so
and
you
it
do
counts
both.
30 cells.
Right. That's a good point.
So you'll need a microscope, a basic bright field microscope, hemocytometer, and a hemocytometer cover slip, which usually when they sell you a hemocytometer, it comes with a cover slip. Some fine pipettes for loading your hemocytometer. A lot of times the hemocytometers will come with those too. And then your transfer pipettes for making your serial dilutions. Something to count with, either tapping on your phone, I guess, or use the little hand clickers, which when I bought them, they were like a couple of bucks a piece. I mean, they weren't very expensive. They're probably like $10 a piece now. I don't know. Some lint-free wipes, some distilled water to dilute your yeast. That's pretty much everything you need.
Store-bought distilled water's fine.
Yeah, you actually want to do, I mean, starting with distilled water is good because then you avoid having like chlorinated city water and whatnot. But if you just use straight distilled water, you're actually going to kill your yeast cells essentially you're putting them in distilled water has no ions in there, lots of ions inside the yeast cell, and so you will burst the cells. Osmosis will drive water into the cell, and so this is probably the number one thing I see when breweries say, I can't get my viability up above, 75% or 60% or something. And it turns out their yeast is fine. They're just killing it when they're counting it.
Mm.
And so
Yeah,
you want to make,
I always had trouble with the viability counts. Well, we were always using distilled, yeah, a gallon jug of distilled water.
yeah, and you think about it, it's like it's always, oh, this is a scientific process. Like I got to use the purest water possible. And I mean, it's good because then you don't have any other contaminants, anything else in your water. But you just want to make a quick isotonic solution. And
You're gonna have to explain that one.
isotonic means the same salt concentration as the interior of the yeast cell.
If you made something
And
like your brewing liquor, something that you would use for like your mash water.
it's that wouldn't even be high enough. Basically, what I found was a 0.9% sodium chloride solution. So
Just salt water,
table salt.
low salt.
Yeah, but
Okay.
you got to be careful. Table salt, a lot of it is iodized, and the iodine
Yeah,
will affect the
kill the
yeast as
yeast.
well.
you want the
Uh,
kosher salt.
Nowadays, you can buy kosher salt, sea salt all the time that has no iodine added. But sometimes those have anti-caking agents in them, and that
Mm.
can cause cloudiness. And it's probably not that bad. But what I found the best, quick and easy solution was pickling salt. So pickling salt has no iodine, no anti-caking agents. It is literally, 100% sodium chloride, and it's cheap as hell. You can buy a 5 pound box for $3.
You said 0.9%.
0.9%. So that means you put,
Can you go
I
by
think,
weight, or you have to go by? Can you just go by
it's
weight and close
weight
enough?
per volume. So I would make up a liter at a time, and that's 9 grams of this salt into a liter of water.
What is it for non-commies that use like the U.S. system? I'm just joking.
Just use metric when you're doing any of these things.
It's easier.
You'll be so much better off.
Yeah, it's funny when I do things. I cross over. Certain things are always English, and certain things are always metric because when you're dealing percent, it's straightforward in
Mhm.
metric, and it's just not straightforward in English units. Okay, so 9 grams per liter, and you get your 9%, 0.9%.
0.9%. Yeah.
Is it? Okay,
Yeah,
beautiful.
if you're doing counts on things like finished beer or even fermenting beer, you may not have to worry about that so much. When you're when you're pulling a thick bit of yeast from a slurry and then you're adding a lot of liquid back, um, then it really becomes an issue. But for example, if you just want to see how many cells in a finished beer, you can just shake up that beer and then degas it, and you can
You
measure
got your
straight
liquid.
off of that. You won't need to do any dilution. You're targeting a certain concentration of yeast in the hemocytometer. So you don't want so many cells that it's really hard to count. You don't want so few cells that you're really not getting a good representative sample, et cetera, et cetera. How many cells, per field are you really looking for, John? What's kind of the right balance between too many, too little?
Yeah. I mean, a good rule of thumb is 30 to 300. So even 30 is on the low side. Now, this is for the entire counting chamber that consists of uh, 25 squares. So when you're counting, you often don't want to spend as much time as it takes to count all 25. And this is, I've never seen a brewery that actually does spend the time counting all 25. They actually just pick 5 representative squares, count those, and then multiply that result by 5. And so as long as you've got, um, you know, less than 300 in that chamber, then you're not overcrowding. It's not possible that you have undercounted your yeast. If you've got too few, then you end up with it's not statistically accurate. You can have very large discrepancies. If you count 17 in one and you count 12 in another, that could be, it ends up being a really big difference once you calculate back with all the dilutions.
Yeah,
So,
one thing to do when you first load it is look, kind of from a distance, a lower magnification, kind of look at how evenly spread the yeast appear to be across the entire hemostometer. If you see kind of like a empty area or a dry area, or you see gas bubbles, that's a real problem because that's an inaccurate count. So you want to make sure you don't have any gas in your solution. You want to make sure that it's mixed really well, like Agi was saying. Make sure it's agitated well so it disperses evenly, and you can kind of tell if you end up with a whole bunch of yeast on one side of the hemocytometer where you loaded it and almost none on the other, then that's not a good loading of the hemocytometer, and you're going to get an inaccurate result.
So that goes back to that degassing you were mentioning earlier. This is why you're degassing. Part of the reason you're degassing, at least.
exactly.
Yeah, you want each of the 5 cells that you count to be pretty close to each other, right? So that way you know that you're pretty good representative versus if you have one count, is 10 and the other one is 100, you're not spread out very evenly. So you kind of question, is your count that accurate?
Exactly. Well, and I mean, you could count the whole hemocytometer, but it's better to get a nice consistent slurry that you're using.
Yeah.
You said 25 total cells?
Yeah, 25 total squares. So what I always did was, cells is kind of what would make sense as a word for that, but I get confused when we're talking about yeast cells and hemocytometer
Yeah, I get it.
cells.
Sorry about that.
No, I mean,
I'm down with the squares. Yeah, I would say if I counted 25 squares,
Fields.
25 times, I would get 25 different results. I'd rather just be able to focus on 5.
There you go.
Yeah.
So I always do the 4 corners and the very center square. And that way you're not worried about having squares that touch each other and worrying about double counting any cells or anything like that.
And what about cells that are, on the line? So there's lines there that you count that help you when you're counting, but some cells will be sitting on the line. Which ones do you count? Which ones do you exclude?
Yeah, great question. So each of these squares has, a small grid inside of it, but then the exterior lines. So you don't want to count any yeast cell that's kind of over. You don't want to count every single yeast cell that's over the line, like straddling it, because that would technically be kind of double counting if you were to count all 25. And so people will pick two sides and say if a cell is straddling this line, these 2 lines, then we'll count it. If it's straddling any of the other 2 lines, we don't count it. I think a common one. Yeah, so I think a common one is like if the cells are straddling the top and the right, you count them, and if it's the left and the bottom, you don't count them.
Right.
It doesn't really matter which ones you choose as long as you're consistent. And then straddling, what the rule I always have is if at least 50% of the yeast cell is on the interior of the square, then I would count it. If it's just a little tiny bit touching from the outside, I don't count it.
I have all sorts of rules on straddling, but none of them have anything to do with yeast.
All right, so I think it's time for our second break here. So this has been outstanding. I'm losing track which direction to go. We're gonna have some great information out of this. This is outstanding. All right, we'll be right back.
Once upon a mundane morning, Barb's day got busy without warning. A realtor in need of an open house sign. No, 50 of them, and designed before 9.
My head hurts.
Any mighty tools to help with this plight?
Aha!
Barb made her move. She opened Canva and got in the groove.
Bulk creating Canva sheets. Create 50 signs fit for suburban streets.
Done in a click, all complete.
Sweet!
Now, imagine what your dreams can become when you put imagination to work at canva.com.
Are you looking for a simple brewing system that's great for all grain brewing, but everything on the market seems to be full of compromises? Blickman Engineering has the answer. The Blickman Brew Easy All Grain Brewing System. The Brew Easy is a complete system with easy upgrades and a beautiful compact design, perfect for any size brewing location. At its core, the Brew Easy is built on two gorgeous Blickman Boilermaker brew kettles, a high temperature March pump, and either a top tier gas burner or the new Boil Coil electric heater. The Brew Easy adapter lid allows the pots to stack on top of each other, forming an efficient, strong, and compact brewing setup that comes in 5, 10, and 20-gallon batch sizes. Upgrade your Brew Easy system with full automated control by adding a Blickman Tower of Power temp controller, and make moving around easy with the Blickman Kettle Cart. The Brew Easy is modular. If you already own a Boilermaker kettle, you can build your Brew Easy by purchasing just the modules you need. The new Brew Easy all-grain brewing system. See it today at BlickmanEngineering.com and brew with Blickman quality on your new Brew Easy.
Back to the two guys that know how to turn beer into beer. This is Brew Strong.
All right, we're back on Brew Strong, and we're talking yeast counting, and this is outstanding information, and I can only see it getting better. I'm looking forward to this. Sorry to interrupt, fellas. Let's keep going.
How do you check for viability, John? You know, there's dyes you use. How do you select what dye to use, and how do you integrate that into your counting process so you can do it all at once instead of having to do it twice?
Exactly. Yeah. So the most commonly used dye is what's called methylene blue, and it is a blue dye that when it is reduced inside of a yeast cell, it will turn clear or colorless. And so that's reduced by the yeast's active metabolism. And so the idea here is that the dye gets into all of the cells, but the living cells will very quickly reduce it and turn colorless again. The dead cells will remain blue. And so as you... Sorry, go ahead, TC.
Does the space between turn blue? I mean,
not so much. I mean, so I think that kind of it might turn like a very light blue, but it tends to kind of aggregate inside of the cells.
If you use about the right amount, I'm sure you could overwhelm a sample with just a load of methylene blue, and then everything looks blue.
I mean, but if one drop's good, then 2 drops is better, right?
You put the right amount in. The live yeast cells take up that dye and metabolize it. You don't see anything there. The cells that are not alive are not very viable. They get stained blue because they can't process the dye, and that's how you tell the difference between a live viable cell and a non-viable cell.
I feel like I want to do this right now. I wish I had the equipment. I want to see it happen. I want to see this process. Very cool.
And when you add the dye, you want to add. There's a certain percentage, right? Because if you add too much, you're gonna get all of them stained, right? Like none of them. It'll be kind of overwhelm them, right?
Yeah. So you want your final in your counting solution. You want your concentration of methylene blue to be 0.01%. So it's a very low. Now you when you buy this, you can buy it as a straight powder, but you also, I think it's really commonly seen as a 0.1% dilution in a bottle already. And so then you just have to dilute that tenfold into your counting dilution. And then what I commonly see is you just kind of have about half the volume of what you want to use as your counting dilution. You have your 0.02% methylene blue, and then you put the other half of your counting dilution. And when you mix those together, you end up with a 0.01% methylene blue. And then you've now diluted your yeast by an additional factor of 2. Uh, this works out because when you multiply by the 5 from having counted only 5 out of the 25 cells, 2 times 5 is 10, and then everything is still just a factor of 10.
So is your final count based on the 25 squares averaged?
Your final count is based on, yeah, 5 out of the 25 multiplied by 5. And then you do the two different counting chambers on the humidsatometer and average those two.
So I got lost in the math, and I might ask this the wrong way, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So the segments we're looking at are 25 squares.
Mm-hmm.
And in the 25 squares, it's subdivided, but we're not talking about the subdivisions within the 25 squares. And so in any one of those squares, if we were, but we're not going, if we were to only count one square, what would be the multiplication to get it all the way back up, assuming we did 100 to 1 to get it into the square?
I think I see what the question is here. So when you're counting the 5, you're actually counting all 5 of those together. And so you're not treating that as 5 separate
Right.
samples.
And that's 1/5 of the square,
Yeah.
of the matrices of squares. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you
So
count
once you do
5, you get
that,
the total count.
so then you're going to multiply. You're going to multiply by 5 because of that. 5 out of
You get
25. You're going to
25.
multiply by
Yeah.
2 because of your twofold dilution. You're going to multiply by whatever your dilution from the slurry was, which is usually 10 to the 2. So the 10 to the second power. And then you're going to multiply by 10 to the fourth power because remember the counting chamber volume is 10 to the minus 4 milliliters. And so that's 10 to the third to the seventh. So you multiply by 10 to the seventh of what the number of yeast cells you counted, and that's the cells per milliliter of your slurry.
And is all of this in the spreadsheet that Jamil posted for everybody?
Yes, it is. Now,
Right.
the spreadsheet I have, if you're just counting once, just use the pre-pitch. There's a pre and post pitch, and the reason for that is because at Heretic we pitched cone to cone, and after pitching, usually your cell count was about half of what it was pre-pitching, and so I had it all set up to average those two to get what the kind of average yeast cell count was so that we would get an accurate count for our large batches. If you're on if you're homebrewing and you just want to pull a sample out of the yeast that you collected, just doing the one in the top left corner, it has 2 spots for you, one for each counting chamber. It'll automatically average those for you and you'll be good to go. And it's also got a place for you to put in the number of dead cells or blue cells, and it'll give you a percent viability.
Okay, so
And then there's also a violet dye, right? Do you recommend that one? Is one more accurate than the other, the blue versus the violet?
Yeah, I've played around with
Easy to
methylene
count.
violet. There's also some other, you can also do alkaline methylene blue or alkaline methylene violet. We'll get to that in a second, but the methylene violet it's just a different, slightly different variation on the dye. Some people claim they can see the purple cells better than they can the blue. For me, the methylene violet was more expensive and methylene blue worked just fine, but your mileage may vary and whatever you want. The alkaline part of it is you have to make up a glycine sodium hydroxide buffer to make it an alkaline solution. What that does is that actually just makes the dye get into the cells better, and it also requires a stand. You have to let it stand for 10 to 15 minutes. I never saw a big enough difference to warrant that amount of time, both to kind of put the buffers together and to wait for counting. So I never really advocated for the alkaline process, and methylene blue is dirt cheap. Um, but one thing we didn't touch on was that you'll sometimes have some cells that get kind of a very light blue color versus cells that have a dark blue color. So the light blue indicates that you do have a functioning metabolism in that cell. And so you should count it as a living cell. It's only the really dark blue ones. And it takes a little bit to kind of see. You'll start to see some and you'll question yourself, is this living or dead? And then once you see your first like truly dead cell, then you'll know. And it's a pretty sharp difference. And with Google and everything nowadays, you can see some examples of that pretty easily. Anytime you have a cell that's budding in the process of budding off a cell, those are going to be pretty light blue just because of the physiology that as they're budding off, their metabolism is down a little bit. So you should never count those as dead because basically by definition, a cell that is reproducing is living. And then in terms of actually counting those, do you count that as one or two cells? The rule of thumb is if the daughter cell, that is the smaller one that's budding off, has a diameter that is at least half of the mother cell, then you count that as two. If it's smaller than half the diameter, you only count it as one cell.
Interesting. So if I followed right, we're doing a full count of all cells, and we're doing a count of viable cells to get our viability. But we're going to use the all cell count and the viability together to determine whatever our yeast calculator is.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, let's say you count 100 cells total, and you counted 5 of them were dead. Then your percent viability is just the number of living cells, which at this point is 100 minus 5, 95, and then divided by 100. So that's a 95% viability. So
that's some good math right there. I can follow that math.
Can you tell I chose those numbers?
I would have chosen similarly.
And you want a certain viability, right? You don't really want to use yeast that's too low on the viability.
Yeah, 95% is a very commonly seen cutoff. I've seen people go down as low as 85%. If you're getting, it's not hard to get 95% viable yeast. If you're getting routinely less than that, then it's time to take a really strong look at your processes. And we could get into a whole nother hour in terms of storing yeast, so we won't dive into that. But the two biggest factors are temperature and pressure, and so you want to keep as low a temperature as possible without freezing, so refrigerator temperatures. And then you want to make sure that you're bleeding off pressure, because pressure buildup as the yeast sets is going to cause them stress.
Very good. Yeah. So recapping, we slipped it in there a minute ago. Jamil has posted the link to John's spreadsheet where you can download it and use it for yourself. It should be a read-only link with download, both in the video live chat and also in the underneath the posted video on Facebook. And if I've got it right, both of those should be available for about 30 days until Facebook removes it. At which point we'll figure out some other way to share John's sheet with you, or you can ask your buddy who actually tuned in, listened, and downloaded a sheet. Maybe pay him $5. Maybe he'll send John $250. Who knows? And you get your own spreadsheet that'll help you with this count. I'm looking forward to taking a look at that sheet.
Yeah, you got to listen live. There's benefits to listening live. Well, and one of the things is if your viability is low, and this is a yeast that you can't purchase a new culture of to start up again, You can go ahead and take that yeast and, add it to a starter, a gentle starter, and, kind of start building it up and leave the non-viable yeast behind and, build yourself up a new culture. The only thing is you need to make sure that it is, clean, that it has no wild yeast or bacteria in there, because as long as that's not in there, you can grow that yeast up again and, start all over. So I'm sure we'll do a show on, propagating yeast and storing yeast and all that stuff. So look forward to those.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yes. So, what was that? I was thinking on that, the blue setup. Do we go through? I mean, you've covered kind of the process. Well, I'd say you covered a lot of details of the process. The methylene blue, we're adding that at the final stage of dilution.
Correct.
All right. So and that's where you got at 2 to 1. And in your instance where you said, 1 to 10, 1 to 10, but you started off with more of a 1 to 5. So you do 1 to 5, 1 to 10, 1 to 2 ends up the same as 1 to 10, 1 to 10. And you get down to that 100. Now, in your spreadsheet, are those dilution variables adjustable? I'm sure one way or another they are.
Gosh, you know what? I think so. Yeah. In fact, right at the underneath dead cells, I've got dilution. And so you can actually, right now it's set at 0.005. You can set that to whatever you want. So if you find that you only need to do a 1 to 10 dilution and then the 1 to 2, then you would change that to 0.05.
I'm thinking more along the lines of maybe I screw up and my dilution's a little different than expected, and so I can correct or adjust the spreadsheet to adjust for my screw up as I did my dilution.
Sure. Yeah. If you can figure out how you screwed up, go ahead and change it.
No worse than I'll screw up the spreadsheet, I'm sure.
I have one question on the isotonic. You said you do the isotonic solution, right, to keep the yeast cells viable.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing a count only, you're not doing the viability check. You just want to count the number of cells. How important is that? Can you just use your distilled or even regular water then if you're just doing just a count, or will that mess up your count?
I don't see why not. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because I was saying sometimes if you're not counting that, if you're not looking at that, you're just you got healthy yeast, you're just trying to do a count to pitch correctly.
Really, a hemocytometer and all that is like the best method, unless you can afford a really expensive machine that will count them for you. But there's a couple other ways you can do it if you want to essentially buy no equipment or very limited equipment. One is if you have a standard 13 by 100 test tube, you can put yeast in there, and you got to, again, pay attention to how you're diluting it. But when it is just not visibly turbid, that's 1,000,000 cells per mil. Then there's also a plate count, where if you know how many cells you put down on a plate, you can see how many grow into colonies, and that tells you how many of them were viable. I really wouldn't recommend, either method, but it is truly methods that you can use.
Yeah, there's the plate count is can be really useful if you, let's say you have like a turbidity meter or a spectrophotometer already, and you don't want to purchase a microscope or anything. You can actually use, so like what Jamil was saying, 1 million cells per milliliter will be essentially not turbid to the naked eye. But you can also use some equipment that will measure those. So if they're called nephelometers or turbidimeters. Those specifically measure turbidity, and then a spectrophotometer, which is one of the workhorses in a lab, can do lots of different tests. But that can also be used to measure that turbidity. But to do that, you need to calibrate it for each yeast strain. So each one is going to have a slightly different um, performance in that turbidity. So, might be 2 million cells per mil or 1.8 million cells per mil, where it loses um, that visible turbidity. And so using the plate counts will allow you to actually dial it in for each individual yeast strain. And usually once you have that, you only have to do it once or twice. And then you can just kind of save those numbers. So.
Interesting. Yeah, it made me think of you guys, Jamil, used to talk about that Lamont water testing kit. And one of the tests is you put maybe an inch of your water with a tablet in the vial, shake, 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 and you put it on top of a little chart kind of thing, and you look through the chart, and based on what you see and based on the chart, it's basically saying how turbid is it.
Yeah.
But if you knew again that turbidity ratio of your specific yeast, or if you use the same yeast all the time and you get used to it, that would be a method, slightly onerous method of determining your yeast counts. And,
Well,
and that,
the reality is, whatever technique you use to measure, if you can have consistency in it, then that's going to afford you the ability to increase or decrease the amount of yeast you're pitching into your beer, in response to, well, I think it needs more, I think it needs less. The point is to do some measurements of some kind and do them consistently so you can repeat what you're doing, and then you can make adjustments intelligently. Again, hemostometer is not that hard. Counting yeast is not that hard to do. It sounds like you need a PhD like John. One of the reasons that I hired John, I needed somebody with a PhD. But if you're smarter than me, maybe not quite as smart as John, you can do this. You can, get a hemostometer and measure yeast. No problem at all.
I think I have a great point to add to that I'll save for after our final break. So we'll be right back. And we're back, just about to wrap up our show on counting yeast with our special guest, John Hughes. And I might actually have something to add to the conversation because this has been an outstanding conversation. Yeah. First I'd say for today, but that's a lie. First for, quite a while now. So as Jamil's saying, you're going to learn from your process. So you do what John said, and you get your count and you get your viability. And then you probably go to your favorite yeast calculator, one that actually still maybe works on your phone versus one that died 6 or 7 versions of Android back. If your results aren't what you're looking for, then you make adjustments. So you know exactly what you have. That doesn't mean that's exactly what you need. So you might find that you still have to adjust your pitch based on your beer results. And that's how you learn from what you're using. But at least you're starting off with, man, you count it this way. You know what you got.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you have. You know what you're starting with, and then maybe you don't have to count it every time. Once you start learning how your yeast is going, maybe you don't have to spend 6 months doing all the tests Jamil did to make his yeast calculator to understand how the yeast lives and dies over time. That's it. That's all I got.
All right.
So. What have we not covered that you think people need to know, John, Huggy, Jamil? You all have measured yeast. I'm the one in here that has not.
I think the one thing, Jamil had touched on this earlier about if you have a very, very flocculent yeast, that they can clump up even in your dilution, and that can disrupt your counts. Because if you just got a giant clump of cells, you're not getting a homogeneous sample. And so there are ways to mitigate that. The most common one I see is using a chelating agent called EDTA. You see this used in food processing. You see it used in laboratories all the time. Basically, what it does is it sequesters metal ions. And so what that will do is it'll actually latch onto the calcium ions that are present in your solution. And calcium ions are necessary for flocculation to happen. So they're kind of essentially a cofactor in the proteins that the cells link together with. And so adding in, the standard is like 100 millimolar. I don't know what that is in terms of percentage, but I think if you took a chemistry class, you can figure that out. But
Google, Google,
or Google.
Yeah.
So this EDTH,
EDTA.
EDTA. I've only seen it associated with chelated iron that I put in the lawn. So can I buy that by the gram, or do I have to buy a 55-gallon drum of this stuff and scoop a little bit out and sell it to my buddies?
Yeah, no, you can buy by the gram. It's I think it's pretty cheap. So
is it white? Is my brother going to do something with it he shouldn't have done with it?
I don't think there's anything you can do with. I think if you ingest a bunch of it, yeah, it's not. He's just going to be upset.
Yeah, but do not snort. Do not snort. It's better not.
Sharpie on the bag. Do not snort, you dumbass.
There you go.
Well, that's pretty cool.
Most of the time, if you just keep shaking your sample enough, it'll eventually come apart. There's yeast that'll stick together, really tough, but some good shaking and it'll come apart. If you're shaking like a maniac, I guess you could injure the yeast a little bit, but still, shaking works pretty good. But
okay.
Yeah, that's probably the toughest thing to overcome, I guess, is when the cells won't come apart. I mean, what other problems do you have?
I did have one other question while you're thinking about the other problems, Jamil. You both had called it a bright light microscope. Is that the standard microscope that I might be used to from actually having like a lab, a biology lab forever ago?
Bright field.
Bright field. Yeah.
That's like if I don't
got the light shining up through the sample.
Okay, I thought it might be. I just want to make sure that was our standard. What probably most of us, and maybe even John, have not ever operated like an electron microscope, but you might have, John. I don't know. So we're not talking something crazy fancy like that. It's just the standard microscope that most people think of when you think of a microscope. And if you're going through reviews, you stated that 400, that 40 times 10x, that's our sweet spot. So if the reviews say that the 40 times 10, the 400 is working well on that microscope, that's a good target. You don't need that 100x to work so well, or whatever's less than that on the microscope.
I mean, really, John, isn't the only reason you need the 1000 magnification, the 100x, is that you need is for bacteria.
Yeah, it's to get like you can see bacteria at 400x magnification. They're really small. So if you want to, if you're trying to diagnose a contamination and you really want to get a good look at the bacterial cell shape and behavior, you're going to need that 100x or 100x objective and the 1000x magnification.
And you have to. A lot of those require oil immersion on the lens.
Yeah, although I've seen more and more now that are oil free. But yeah, definitely if you're buying one to look at bacteria, make sure you note whether it's oil immersion or oil free.
And I want to say on the microscope as well, since I had issues doing the viability count with the color, we had a microscope it was the bright field microscope, but there was a color wheel, and so you could change the color of the light shining up. And so that would help to, try to find the right color. It would be a nice contrast between the cells that were viable and non-viable. I can't remember what color. It was like yellow or green or something. It would give a better contrast. So if you can find a microscope with that, it does dilute the light a little. It does dim the light a little bit, but it helped when doing the viability checks.
Nice.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that. I like that tip.
Yeah.
Huggy's all about the colors. He's got the violet coming in, he's got the color wheel coming in, and I get it because we do see things differently. And
I'm color coded, baby.
Well, John, you've done it countless times. if there was a point in time when counting was difficult for you, that was probably quite a while ago. But somebody who's going to count, especially homebrew, we're going to count once every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks. Little tips and tricks like that could really help us out, if not just at the beginning. And if you want to count bacteria, more power to you. You might want to start off with something that does 400x for a good price and then trade up. But if you're a gear kind of guy, you're probably going to buy that thing that does 1,000x right off the bat, because that's what homebrewers do. We like gear.
Yeah. Well, and just it's fairly easy to count cells and to check viability. If you mess up a couple of times, that's okay. It really doesn't take a whole lot of yeast to do your counts. It's really not a whole lot of expensive equipment. It works, it's pretty easy to do. And the information you gain from it is pretty vital if you want to really be the best brewer you can be. So give it a whirl.
If you do mess up, we've got our mixture all the way down to where it's at. We've got methylene blues in there and all. At that point in time, is it just a couple seconds, couple minutes to refresh our plate, redose, and measure again? Is the methylene blue still fine? I mean, or do we have to start from scratch and reblend down?
Yeah, no, you can go from that same sample that you had. If you were to leave it out for an hour or so, I would recommend redoing everything. But the time it takes to kind of clean off the hemocytometer and then dry it, 30 seconds, a minute. So you're fine just reusing that.
Perfect. Get yourself some dust-free lab wipes in case you need to clean something off, dry something off.
Don't set it next to your mill.
Chem wipes. Yeah. Again, you can get them off of eBay, Amazon.
Yeah.
All right.
It was a great show, everybody. I'm going to come back and I'm going to ask JP to mute myself, and I'll come back and listen to the muted copy so I don't have to listen to myself talk. It's been a great show. Lots of outstanding information. I love this. I've only ever seen, I've seen your lab once or twice at Heretic, John, and I've seen Huggy's lab Eddie had back at No Label. You might have even been measuring yeast one day when I was there, but I have not seen enough of this. I need to see more of this. All right, if you're listening live, our next show is going to be from the mailbag, and we're going to cover some questions around this and adjacent to this and probably nothing to do with this following up, and that'll be in a few minutes, versus if you're not listening live, then you get to wait a couple weeks. And hopefully everybody can find these shows. We usually cover that question every time, and you can see the show live for about 30 days on Facebook, and they should take it down, and you can hear the show through the Brewing Network, through wherever you get your podcasts, and I believe also on YouTube. You need to follow the Brewing Network's channel on YouTube. Don't forget to visit our wonderful sponsor, Blickman Engineering, and don't just visit. Maybe go ahead and put something in the cart and check out. Buy it, and we'll see if we've convinced them by any chance to add some yeast measurement, some lab type equipment to their lineup. I mean, that won't be fast, but by the time the show comes out, it could be around. That's not super fast. So everybody, thanks for joining in, and brew strong.
Brew strong.
Brew strong.
Brew strong.